glad we got round to doing this. We've been threatening for a few years, but actually I think your story's been maturing like a fine wine, so it's probably perfect timing for it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That's really good. So yeah, we've talked about it quite a bit, haven't we? And actually the relationship has been an interesting one, because there's some parallels, aren't there, in sort of time and when we first met each other, I suppose.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you've always been, I can't even remember who recommended for you to have a chat with me about the segue that was happening in your life at the time, which was at the same time that I set up Sullivan Stanley. So it was 2016, you were deciding to move on from the corporate permanent exec life, and were sort of toying with, do I become interim, do I become portfolio, and you joined that event many years ago that Christian, Malcolm and I did. So obviously a lot has sort of passed under the bridge since then, but you've been a very active contributor through all of our community, especially the Change Society and the CIO community, and always been a big supporter of what we do. So I think when you look at what you were going through then and the journey that you've had going from permanent exec to now a successful portfolio executive, I think there's a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people, because people are phoning me up and asking me for help. There's a lot of people now that during COVID-19, even if they were having thoughts about, do I have another perm gig in me? Do I go into the interim world? Do I become a portfolio exec? Do I try and do something slightly different with my value and IP and my expertise and what I've learned over the years? I think COVID-19 is now sort of shining a light on it. So that's really why I kind of wanted to invite you onto this sort of future business movement series, Adrian, because it's not just about cutting edge leadership and things that are happening in the business world. It's about the future of work and people's preferences changing, and as you know, I wrote a book about it, and I did see it starting to, as I talked about in the book, didn't know it'd be COVID-19 that might really catalyze the interim revolution, but I really do feel that there's going to be a lot of senior knowledge workers now that are going to be looking to have a different way of working. So I think your story is going to be well received today. So I suppose that's what the talk's really about, which is, that journey from permanent executive to a portfolio executive. So before we get into that, it'd be good for you to just do your name, your game and your claim to fame, just for anyone that will be.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Pat. Yeah, obviously there has been a lot of parallels in terms of, how things have developed over the last few years. And actually, for the record, it was Mark Chillingworth that introduced us. Okay. And you're right, that particular event that you organised back at Rebel Street with Christian and Malcolm was certainly very influential and very, very helpful for me. And I'll touch back on that. But so my name is Adrian Wakefield. I am in what I think I've referred to as post-executive life, coming up for 4 years now. And essentially I focus on technology operating models and organisational design. So the game that I believe is important is that technology is pretty much at the heart of anything you want to do as a business. That's grow, shrink, change, expand, acquire, create new products, look at new markets, almost anything. And so the question I believe that most leaders should have at the forefront of their mind is not just what technology do we need, but how is our technology capability organised and how is it performing? So that's what I work on. I saw the question about a claim to fame, and I thought, do you want an interesting fact about Adrian Wakefield that is a little known fact, personally, or do you want a business claim to fame? And I thought, well, I don't have any claims to fame, but my wife did go out with a couple of pretty mega rock stars in her earlier career. So I'm married to a first-class rock chick. That's certainly something not many people know about me. So there's a couple of names that maybe I could share with you at another time, Pat. From a business perspective, that's interesting. I enjoyed, I believe, a successful career in a global engineering organisation, values-based organisation, and had a really good role. So I ended up as a leader in what I think is proper mid-market, but global professional organisation, turning over hundreds of millions, operating with several thousand staff globally. And I really enjoyed that piece of work. But my claim to fame from a business perspective pales into insignificance, because I would have said that crisis management. I was actually involved in recovering 2 major manufacturing plants that were flooded, completely flooded during, very, very damaging weather events. And that's the only time I've really experienced the same sense of cooperation and purpose and that really fantastic spirit that I think we're seeing around here at the moment. There is an amazing sense of cooperation. Clearly not everybody is as fortunate as maybe, we are, but I think that, your introduction, Pat, you talked about the changes that we're seeing. And I think we're seeing a lot of purpose-driven and values-driven, activity. And that's really quite exciting to be a part of, even though obviously it's in very, very difficult circumstances. So hopefully that's enough to get us going, Pat.
It is indeed. I thought it'd be good to start off with the term or the phrase that we always refer back to from our earlier days when we were growing a relationship. The term you coined, the accidental interim. So talk to us about that, Adrian.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, it actually goes back to that meeting where the history for that is that in my late 40s, I was in this organisation I talked about, and I was proud to have worked in that organisation. I'd had quite a long career there. I had influence, I had equity, I had a real role, I had good sponsorship, I had a role on the board, all those things that people look for. And I enjoyed it greatly, but there was part of me that was just wondering, is there something more? Do I want to be doing something different? But I'm not sure I necessarily had the conviction at that stage to make that move myself. And the circumstances was that my sponsor, who was the chairman, who'd been my boss for 13 years in this organisation, was beginning to make his exit plans and move on. And he was making changes in the organisational structure. And what transpired was that I was reporting to a colleague I'd worked for 13 years, worked very closely with alongside, and we'd done some great things in this organisation. But actually, at a line management level, despite the fact that Dietrich was clearly the best guy for the job, hugely passionate about it, at a management relationship perspective, it just didn't work for either of us. And it really was time to look at something else. So I took what I think you would call a good leaver exit package. I left on very good terms and had a little financial nudge that allowed me to look at what it was that I was wanting to do. But I didn't really know very much about the different ways of work and the options that were out there. I was a career executive. I was a permanent employee in organisations. And I thought that's what I needed to do. I hadn't thought about interim or portfolio at all. But actually, it became very, very clear to me that the combination of values, the right work, the right reward structures, the right people, right, the right challenges that were right for your family and other things, they weren't necessarily very easy to come across. Right. And of course, like most people, I had commitments that I needed to meet. And actually, very quickly, I worked out that I might quite like to get involved in looking at some interim opportunities and maybe what you would regard in my mind at that point, slightly more temporary outlook on life. Right? And I wanted to learn about that and find out about that. And the thing that happened, of course, is that I did actually get quite a couple of opportunities pretty quickly. But when I came along to that particular event that we talked about, Malcolm was up there and he was talking about how he'd been planning this for a huge amount of time and how indeed it was really as the result of a very long education, and it was clearly part of a very planned outcome, right? And then Christian talked about how he planned it and made it all happen. And I was just thinking, but guys, I'm almost here accidentally. And I think that night over a beer, we coined the phrase, the accidental interim, But that said, it's been a very good accident for me, Pat. It's a very, very good accident.
Amazing. I think it's the reality though, isn't it? Some people are really intentional around it. And I talk about this quite a lot, and I do a lot of coaching with execs, as you know. Sometimes you've just got financial commitments. They're not going away anytime soon, so you have to get all your ducks lined up. And there's other things you need to do, like warm up your network. Start to make a decision around what's my sweet spot. What do I want to build around myself? What do I love doing? How am I going to trade my IP and turn it into a product, or at least a series of messages and a narrative that people are going to find me behind.
I think that's sorry, Pat.
Yeah, I get that through one thread, it does take some planning. But the reality of what you said was your catalyst was that something happened after a period of time, and you found yourself with an opportunity to exit that would give you a reasonably softer landing to explore this world. And I think that's actually more realistic, especially in today's times. So for people who might be going through that right now, talk to us about how what you went through, from the doubts you might have had, for the different areas that you explored, the networks you tried to get into, the knowledge you tried to accrue, whilst in that sort of accidental interim mode, because I think that would be really useful for some people listening.
Yeah, cool. I think there are some really there are some things that when I look back on them, some of them clearly, once I decided that this is what I was going to do, that I was exiting the organisation, that was quite a big thing for me. It was a 13-year period, and one of the things I had to face up to was lots of people in this world who expect you to have a myriad of experiences in loads of different organizations, and actually face up to the reality of that question, well, why were you there so long? I face off with that question and reconcile that one pretty straightforwardly, because it was good. And actually I had a great job, which did actually generate a lot of experience. But the first thing that I did was I had to reconsider my approach to networking. I'd perhaps been a little bit traditional in that perspective. Maybe in this world of, being concerned about the security of your profile and your identity, there is advice out there that says you should basically only recommend somebody if you've worked with them, or you should only connect with them if you know them well. Well, I've been quite traditional about that, and I built up a network of people, maybe only 500 connections on one particular social platform, but not a huge amount by anybody's standards. But I think the first thing I did was actually I wrote to every single one of those people. It took me quite a time, right? I handcrafted a message to each of them and asked them to endorse me, to recommend me, to write something about me that they thought was good. And this is where I think you do get back, right, what you put in. If people don't want to say something about you, they won't say anything and they won't respond. But I was very fortunate, because I am a believer in relationships. I had a huge amount of support from those people writing back and talking to me about strengths and profiles. So the first thing I did was get my initial social profile in some kind of shape, so that at least it presented something about Adrian, with a degree of endorsement about the capabilities and skills I had. But also I took a fundamental view that I needed to get much more networked very, very quickly. And that obviously was by a process of talking to a lot of people, reaching out. And there are only a number of ways that you're going to generate work, aren't there, right? And generate income. It's through the people you know about, it's through the people you're referred to, or it's through direct advertising and marketing. And actually, interestingly enough, I pursued a bit of a strategy in terms of all three of those things. But one of those introductions led me to meet with you and Malcolm and Christian. And there was a huge amount that I learned from that particular session. So one of the reasons I think that we've enjoyed conversation over these years, Pat, is because there's been a lot of value that I have gained from listening to some of the people in the network and what they can advise you about. And I took away a lot of things from some of those early sessions, right? So changing approach to networking, okay? Listening very clearly to the fact that actually what you know is not what everybody else understands, all right? Sometimes you think because you know these things, everybody else does, right? but there was a particular message that I think Christian might have coined, and it was really, you are sitting on a mountain of value. And sometimes when you're standing on top of that value, it's only when you take a step back that you can start to really understand what value you're actually sitting on. Yeah. So I did some work understanding that value. And I think then you've really got two approaches, right? You're either going to be a generalist, which is a general manager, a manager of people and functions, or you're going to be a specialist. And I decided that the world was full of IT leaders and CIOs and IT directors, and actually that's a pretty crowded marketplace. And so I decided that I was going to specialize, and that was really, so a whole set of events around there. Really, for me, what I thought was I'm going to be known for something in particular. I'm not just going to be known as a generalist. And I believe I probably had pretty good credentials for being, a CIO or an IT manager in certain sectors. But I didn't feel that that was necessarily enough to set me apart from other people. So I decided I was going to specialize. So that's certainly advice that I would give to people, is think very, very carefully about what it is you want to do. Do you want to be that generalist, or do you want to go deep and be really known as an expert? And if you do want to be known as an expert, then make sure you understand what that story is and what that pitch is. And obviously that comes back to the introduction about the game that I find myself in, Pat, and I've found that story to be a reasonably easy story to tell to people. And I think those are things that are very important in helping people understand quickly what it is you do.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many good things in there, Adrian. I must have had, I don't know, hundreds, maybe even 1,000 plus execs come and see me and sit on that couch in Rupel Street, or even when I was back in La Fosse. And since then, as Sullivan Stanley has started to progress. And the reality is that when people are more akin to what your situation is like, they've either been made redundant, so they found themselves in a position where they're looking to explore into a different way of working, or there's a natural segue and an opportunity to exit. And the big problem that, the big mistake really that I see a lot of execs making is once they get into a permanent executive position, they drop all the network. So they'll spend a certain time warming up their network and making all these connections, and then they'll get the gig and they drop it. So it goes from lukewarm or red hot to cold. And actually, when you're interim or an expert or portfolio, you realize that it's networking for life. The other way of looking at it, and I really loved what you talked about, sending sort of 500 handcrafted messages, I'm assuming via LinkedIn, to your 500 connections.
That's right, yeah.
So the way that I turn it is because you see these people and they're like, I haven't got a network and I haven't been to a networking event for 3 years. I've just delivered this heavy transformation, or I've been in a really heavy operational role. I just haven't had time to network. And I was like, well, actually, do you have a LinkedIn profile? Yes. How many connections do you have? 250, 500, 1,000, 2,000. Okay. Have you ever done a spider diagram around everyone you're connected to? And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, let's think about everyone you've worked with outside of your current role you've just exited, or your current role now. How many people have you employed? How many consultancies have you engaged with? How many opportunities have you given? How many people you connected with? And then doing an audit on LinkedIn of all these people that at some point you should have had a good exchange with. And it's amazing what untapped value people have in their LinkedIn networks, that they just don't have that, I suppose, a headhunter view to it, which, comes second.
I think there's a couple of really interesting things there, Pat. Actually, the piece of advice about the network is your work is absolutely true. And some people won't network with salespeople because they see it as pushy. If somebody approaches me on LinkedIn, right, and they're prospecting, then I've got a pretty standard reply these days, which is, it's great to be connected, right? I wish you lots of luck with your prospecting, right? But actually, right at this moment, I can't help you because we're all accountable for the experience we give to people. And that's just somebody trying to do their job, and they may be able to help me in the future. So something else that stood me in really, really good stead is you never know when you might be able to help each other. And we're all responsible for the approach that we take to things and the experience we give to things. So if you give somebody just a little bit of time, right, and you give them a little bit of opportunity, then that can often come back and help you at some other point in time in the future. So there was a lot of good advice. In fact, it was from you, Pat, where you said that, you know, don't forget the network when you move into a job. And I think that is really, really sound advice. And actually, if you're passionate about something and you're caring about what it is you do, the networking is actually a pleasure, you know. It's actually a really interesting thing to be part of. And one thing I would say to people is that the portfolio world and the interim world generally has a really open and sharing approach to information, because most people that are worth their weight in this world have that view. You never quite know when you may be able to help each other. And when they hold that view, it means they're willing to share and to nudge and to help. And you've seen firsthand the power of, say, how some powerful people in our network have created some brilliant resources just through crowdsourcing. You know, for instance, there's a colleague we both know, Don Mason, who did an amazing piece of work in terms of just preparing people with a crowdsourced set of information about home working. You know, really, really valuable, all through the power of the network and all through just a positive approach. So I think that's fantastic advice, Pat, and I think, you know, really important for anybody in this space.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think we're programmed the same way. All sorts of magic happens within a network as long as you're constantly providing value into that network. So it's the power of reciprocity. Give more than you're expecting to get back, and then just wonderful things happen.
Yeah, I think there's, I agree with that. I mean, I didn't necessarily see myself as a natural with that, and I'd always been a little bit of an introvert in terms of actually, you know, my style as a person. But I think the fact is that, you know, there is a lot of value to be gained from the network, you know. But also just recently, going back to one of the points you made about the jump right now, clearly, a lot of people are finding themselves where they're forced into a situation where they're looking at, crikey, what's my move, you know. So whilst we've coined, you know, somewhat comedically the accidental interim, right, I did have some soft landing to that side. You know, I was in a reasonably secure position, and I think some of the other pieces of advice that I think, you know, are really useful for people to hear are that actually you must be able to stand some of the barren periods in this. You need to understand your commitments and to ride the waves. You know, I've been very, very fortunate. I haven't actually had a gap in my interim stroke portfolio career, and I've been fortunate to be able to manage some slightly more consulting and advisory opportunities in parallel. But some people, it isn't the reality. It depends what type of work they are doing. And you've got to have the financial wherewithal, or at least understand how long you can have that financial burden placed on you and the gap in there. So I think, you know, it might be a 6-month piece for some people, you never know. And I think that is also something that people going into this world do want to understand, that whilst it can be incredibly rewarding in terms of the value of delivering your own solution, selling your own wares, you know, creating something with people without an enormous corporate brand behind you. You know, this is you, right? And that's what's so fantastic about it, that people are buying you as an individual. You know? But actually, you do need to make sure you can ride through those waves. And I think that was another piece of very good advice that I got early on.
Yeah, you've got to be prepared for bench time.
Yeah, as you put it, yeah.
On
that be a normal bench too long, but that's cool.
Yeah, true. So you mentioned, you know, the term "you." So it's you PLC. So it's almost like when you take this switch, you've got like a mini version of a startup with all the same pressures. So talk to us about the challenges that you faced throughout that period, and how you got your first gig under your belt, and then the confidence and experience that you got through that first gig as the accidental interim, becoming an interim professional, being able to provide you know, your service with your brand, and how that was received and what your experiences were with it.
Yeah, I think what it is fair to say is that brand and the clarity around all of that was developing during that first year. Okay, I won't say that I went into the very first piece of work that I did with real clarity around actually quite what I was going to do, but there are some things that were easy for me to do, but which aren't easy for some people. So, or at least they have less experience. I think don't underestimate what it takes to just establish a limited company, to set that up, and understand the duties that you have to actually operate in that way. But for me, because I'd come from a portfolio group, an engineering group with a portfolio of global companies, I'd been used to running profit and loss accounts and balance sheets, and those things were fairly straightforward for me. Don't underestimate administration and keep on top of it. But the big one I think we've been really talking about is the marketing and how you actually present yourself and the brand that is associated with you. And that is still something that I think, I have taken some professional help. I've been siphoning off some of my funds and some of the cash I'm generating to keep supporting me with somebody who holds up a good mirror to me and helps challenge me in terms of the messaging. So I think certainly really getting that marketing story and the messaging right is a very important piece. Often you don't have very long to tell people what it is about what it is that you do, and you want to make a quick impression on that. So I actually have invested quite a bit in that sort of side of things, right? Some of it would have been work I've been doing myself to actually piece that story together, understanding the things that were working really well in my career for me, understanding the values I have, what I like in my personal life, and piecing those together, looking at things when they were going really well and trying to crunch that down into saying why were they going really well at that particular point in time. And I know, Pat, that that's something that you spent some time on with some external organisations to help you think about yourself. That was really good value and help. Don't underestimate the importance of a bit of reflection about that and the skills. That takes some time. But in terms of actually the first two pieces of work, one of those was a referral. So actually, it was through a guy. He'd been a colleague on an operating board in a company, and we'd worked together for 3 to 4 years. And he'd been working as an interim in general management and business operations management in manufacturing and supply chain. And Paul was hugely helpful to me. And I secured a consulting engagement with a really well-known in their sector industrial suppliers organisation that resulted in work for about 9 months. So that was one of the first pieces. But there was quite a long time gap from when I left executive life and when that was due to kick off. And actually, the second piece of work, or in fact, it turned out to be the first piece of work I delivered, but it was the second piece of work I'd secured, I actually got from an advertisement. And so, although there's only about, I think the statistics say that 20% of the market maybe comes through direct advertisement, I did actually secure a piece of work through a direct advertisement, As I say, I've now secured work through interim specialists and challenger consultancies, as well as through referrals and also through as I say, direct advertisements. But so I was lucky, but I think, I spent time on talking to those people, talking about that spidergram, who really I thought could help me. So when I wrote those messages, Pat, they weren't all the same message. Some of them were tuned because I knew that this person potentially might be able to leverage me into another organisation or connect me up with somebody that could really help.
And that's what I love about the power of the network. When you do that spider diagram, I was coaching one exec once, and I think he looked at me as if, I'm never going to do that. And I was like, look, just humour me, get yourself a really strong cup of coffee on Saturday morning, lean into it for 2 hours, and then we'll have a chat on Monday and we'll go through some of it. And just tell me top 10 from that exercise of people that could be of value to you, that you were value to them at some point. Yeah. And there was one individual who he had employed as a BA I think it was remember the year 2000 upgrade program that everyone was doing?
Or Y2K, exactly. Yeah.
Y2K. So he was a top end BA, one of the best young hotshot BAs that he'd employed on that Y2K piece, who was now head of advisory for Alvarez and Marcel. Reached out, got a gig in 2 weeks.
Exactly. Fantastic.
And Alvarez and Marcel have been feeding that person, pretty much his portfolio career for the last sort of couple of years. So you've just, have a little dig into who you know, and it might be there right in front of you, right in front of your nose.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice, Pat. And absolutely, as I say, you never know when people are going to help you. And I think when you start to look at that, it's not static. People's career trajectories change. But I'm a massive believer in you get back what you put in.
Agreed.
Which is why around any community, you mentioned I've been active, but I believe that actually that's because, I know why I'm there. I'm there to help people in the hope that they may help me.
Yeah.
And I think, when you look at it through that lens, you will soon generally see that there's actually some really useful connections in that network that you've probably already got. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't work on expanding the network and keeping it moving.
This is it. I mean, what I like about what we're talking about is you've embraced all the different routes to market and you've been proactive with it. So yes, you have to get into networks that have already been assembled and start to give value. Yes, you do need to build those relationships with interim management specialists, challenger consultancies. Management consultancies are using lots of interim experts. They are going into the executive gig economy and the interim economy to get, I've got a big premise about the top 5% is in that space. And then you've got the direct advertising from people who used to be in executive search and recruitment that are now on site, and they're advertising for people like you.
Well, and sometimes, a recruitment agent who's doing a particular generalist piece suddenly gets presented with an opportunity he's not sure quite how to fill from his own network, and so he'll go out to market.
Exactly.
And you do see things like that, yeah. And sometimes organisations, of course, will think that they, want to access people by going out directly to market because they've got a good brand or a reputation. So you do see those things. So I think, I'm not saying that that any one of them is necessarily right or wrong. I think the best type of work is a referral.
Yeah,
of course it is, right?
The best form of marketing. If someone recommends you to someone, you're straight in.
Absolutely.
But you do need to work those channels. But I do think there's that. I mean, I've seen so much over the last 20 years around how to create opportunity, how to build relationships, all those kind of good things in what I'm an expert in. And it's the people who are proactive with their network and proactive with the routes to opportunity, and they give into those networks and they're generous with their time, and the ones that always do very well. If you're passive and you go out and see 5 or 6 people and then expect them to call you, that's when you're going to struggle. So I think there's a really big message there about you've got to be proactive with the connections you make.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there, Pat. I mean, I used to have a very wise man that worked for me who was super chap. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But Derek used to say about any good community, right? Good community depends on good community leadership, of course, right? You need somebody who cares about it and will drive it and is the energy. And in your world, Pat, of course, your communities are driven by you and your community leaders. But I've seen it in engineering symposiums where they're lobbying groups, and there's just a fantastic community leader, right, who's doing that. But then you get the rule of thirds in the attendees, and the rule of thirds is those people who just get it and they get involved and they want to do it. Those people who kind of sit on the fence, right, and maybe they'll not be quite sure. And then the other third of people who are kind of looking around the room wondering why they're there. And they're the ones who generally won't get very much out of it, So I've always quite liked the rule of thirds when it comes to community. But
That's great.
Yeah, cool.
There's another thing you said about investing in yourself. So if I think about if we're talking about mistakes to avoid, I think, one of the mistakes is never drop your network. And once you heat it up, keep feeding it, keep giving back. I think the second one is, when people are trading their own IP via a limited company, they don't invest in themselves. So it's so key that you look at who's made this switch, who's super successful, who might give me some mentoring. Who can I lean to for some coaching here? Who's a marketing whiz that can help me you know, start to brand myself, to position myself where people are going to find me, and all those kind of good things. And I love the fact that you embrace that early on.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. I'll tell you a little story about actually education and skills. So there are not many executive courses in operating models in the UK. There are lots of consultancies who want to put a very big engagement around it, because fundamentally the transformations that can come from it are very substantial. Yeah. But there aren't many professional education courses. For most of 2018, I hummed and hawed about the £3,500 investment for going on effectively a 3-day professional course by one of the, you know, they're a very, very reputable executive education facility, you know, a world-class facility. But, you know, I hummed and hawed about it because in essence, that's a lot of money for a lot of people, right? But not only that, when you are working and fundamentally trading time for money, which is something that interims are often doing, right, then actually you're also not billing for those days. So it becomes, suddenly it becomes a £6,000 or £7,000 investment, and not a £3,000 investment or an opportunity cost. Anyway, I hummed and hawed about attending this particular course on and off for a long while, right? I went on it within the past X period. I was so pleased I went on it. It was fantastic. First of all, I really enjoyed it felt really good that I was saying, yes, I am worth spending this money on. That was a really nice thing to say. But the networking, the confidence about what I was doing in terms of my work, you know, having a relationship with one of the, you know, some fundamentally known as the gods of operating models. You know, there are loads of good things that come with it, but that's a really good example of what I would call investing in yourself. You know, you do need to keep skills current, and you need to be open to new ideas, and you need to be curious. But I was really pleased when I did that, Pat. You know, not because I'd spent a lot of money, but actually because I'd said to myself, I'm worth it, and actually this is a real investment in what I'm doing. I just didn't have a large corporation to pay for that executive education anymore.
But yeah, the return investment you'll get back on it though will pay off. You know, 10x. Yes, I mean,
undoubtedly.
The best person you can invest in is yourself, and that's one of the mistakes I see when people don't get the training that's paid for by corporates. They go and build something around themselves, and they forget to invest in themselves, and that's a mistake they shouldn't make, because actually you're the best person to invest in. So, you know.
Well, I mean, often in this case, you are the only person that
Exactly.
is leading that investment in early days. You know, so I think, you know, clearly a lot of what you do when you're setting out on this is that you are presenting and marketing yourself, but obviously the skills and the IP that you come with. But, you know, it's been a fantastic transition for me personally, and I absolutely wouldn't go back to a permanent role unless it was with an amazing group of people doing some amazing work with something that I really believed in and had an incredible purpose. Because I do think that sometimes people can get a little bit confused about the compensation mechanisms, right, as opposed to what I would regard as interim mindset, right, which is about delivering value, you know, retaining a degree of independence, being able to say things in a clear way that actually sometimes you wouldn't if you were embroiled in the internal politics of the situation, you know. And I think that the interim mindset is as important, but I would regard that as distinct from the compensation mechanism. I don't mind if somebody wants to structure a fixed term contract for me. Perfect. Don't have a problem with that. Yep. It's just whatever works for the client from that perspective. But what is important is about coming in, delivering quickly, delivering value, and actually being in a position to then say, hey, great, we've finished this, let's move on to the next piece of work.
Yeah, it's such a great thing to say. I mean, my personal view, even though my background is, you know, well known in interim and now with this challenging consultancy, Sullivan Stanley, is you shouldn't really care whether you're on a day rate contract, a fixed term contract. I don't think the word permanent should exist anymore. It's all a contract. And if you come in with a mindset, I'm going to deliver value, I'm going to give an independent view to try and do the best thing for this whole ecosystem to get the best result for the customer ecosystem internally and externally, does it really matter how I'm paid? Because actually, I think when you look at the future of work, let's say you are permanent, shouldn't permanent people be allowed to have a portfolio arrangement with their career anyway? Shouldn't they be allowed to have an NED on the side, a trusteeship on the side? Shouldn't they be allowed to do some advisory and part-time work with pro bono charities or VC startups? Because then they can bring that different mentality back into the organisation. And
our organisations are already doing it, Pat. You know, I know that in part of ABB, I know a couple of senior execs in that engineering organisation, they already do it. In Legal and General, where I had a really particularly good piece of work for Legal and General, great brand. I know they already do it. Their chief data scientist is a fantastic example of a portfolio career guy, and Legal and General are benefiting from that. You know, so I think it's really interesting. I think we're seeing that shift. You know, Pat. Yeah.
I think we'll see a lot more of it now that people's habits are changing over the last 40 days, and you know, they're going to want a bit more from life now rather than.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, it's cool. I mean, clearly, it's horrendous circumstances for some, and you know, we will get through this. Not everybody will get through this, unfortunately. But I think that as we started, you know, the societal shift that will come from some of this, I think will be in the right direction. I think that many organisations will be examining their operating models and their ways of working. And whilst there's been a little bit of an adjustment in the short term, you know, and clearly those interims that are specialists in crisis management and communication, or infrastructural engineers and architects designing, you know, remote ways of working systems at global scale, of course, there are different demands. And some of those slightly more strategic things might be a little bit more on the back foot right now. But I'll tell you what, I think there's going to be a massive demand for many of those things in the months and weeks ahead, because there's going to be permanent change that will come from this, and a huge big adjustment. But yeah, we mustn't forget that, as you said, there are many people who have been pushed into a situation that is not of their own making. But maybe for some people, it's given them the nudge that they needed, you know, and it might not have been the circumstances they've chosen. You know, I didn't choose the circumstances that I was in at that point in time. But when I look back on it, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But generally everything happens for a reason. Agreed. And usually there's a bit of a silver lining somewhere in it. It can just be a bit bloody hard to see it when you're right up against it sometimes, you know.
Agreed. So we've covered quite a bit. You know, the catalyst for you going into becoming an interim professional. We talked about becoming the accidental interim, and you know, the conversation around that, your experiences of having to make a shift in how you marketed yourself, how you branded yourself, how your perception changed on networking. You got a referral into your first gig, you got your second one, which I know you very much enjoyed, through an advert. Then you've got other sort of multiple ones that you're kind of doing a portfolio arrangement with at the moment. So talk to me how it feels now. So I think that's a reality with people's journeys from, you know, maybe they get the first interim and then they start to get some confidence and the network grows and you get known for a niche, you get known for an expertise, and then other opportunities start to come to you. Talk to us about how that feels right now and how long that took.
That's interesting. There was definitely some cyclic sort of behaviour in that, you know. It was a big change, and I don't think one should underestimate that change. But how do I actually feel? I really, really am enjoying the balance and the way in which I can organise my life that suits me and Jules, you know. We're very lucky, and at the moment, clearly, there are many people who aren't very fortunate, but we get to balance the social and sort of, you know, our personal interests and the things we're really passionate about outside of work really well. The positive feeling that comes with actually, you know, it being about you and you delivering and you driving yourself, you know. I don't need somebody behind me to motivate me or tell me what I need to do or to turn up. But the pleasure, I'll maybe just turn it around. One of the most positive things that I've been able to do in this, right, more recently, is have a really, really grown-up conversation with a client and a consultancy about why this wasn't the right piece of work to be doing for the business, for me, and actually we should stop it right now. And that is such a powerful feeling when you're into that position, you know. And I would not have thought I would have had the confidence to necessarily do that, because of course we do need, as we started, there's a degree of financial commitment that all of us had. But I think as long as you make sure that you are not putting that as your primary motivator, you know. So the money is of course, it's a nice reward for high-level interim performance, but actually the ability to be able to run your life in a way that suits you and to make meaningful recommendations to people, an ability to decide, right, okay, well, today I'm going to be measured on outcomes. I'm not going to be measured on how I'm present. If I want to burn the midnight oil because I've got a deadline to deliver to, then that's me that says that I'm going to go and do that, right? And that's a very, very, very powerful feeling. And that is a situation that I think is definitely worth the change. Really, really. As I said, I wouldn't look back on this in another way, Pat. Yeah.
Great way of saying it. So look, just to draw to a close, because I think you and I could probably talk for hours, and I try and keep this.
I don't think we've had too much problem with that.
If we could practically just say, look, no question, there's going to be people listening to this that are either now planning for a switch at some point, or have got an opportunity to take a payout, or unfortunately might be in a position now where they're on the bench or furloughed and they're looking at what's next for them. Could you take us through the kind of do's and the don'ts and the tips about the reality of making that kind of switch into interim and a portfolio way of working?
Well, I think, just to summarize some of the points we've been talking about, I think, the realities are, understand what it is you're going to go and focus on, right? Make sure you do a really good and honest appraisal of what it is that you need out of life, your commitments, and what it is you're good at and what it is you want to work on, right? And I think that's a really important piece of self-reflection. And if you don't know that you're being really honest with yourself about that, go to your network and get some trusted advisors to give you some proper feedback about your strengths and weaknesses, right? But I think that is really, really important, okay? Yeah. Talk to your partners and your loved ones about it, because it's different, I'm at a position where, I don't have to worry about children in university. Those things are gone for me and we're moved on. Yeah? So I think really understand what it is that you're looking for out of this, and understand what kind of business and outcome you want. So I think that what I mean by that is, do you want, what I do is I run myself as what I would call a lifestyle business, all right? I have scaled a number of opportunities around it, and I work with some organizations, and, I run a portfolio of activities, there's no doubt about that. But I am not looking to scale something to sell this at the end of it. I'm looking to allow myself to run my life in the way that I want to run it in. And I think that is really, really important. Yeah. So really make sure you know what it is you want out of this, right? And as I say, I think from that perspective, then it's about moving in, working with your network, and just getting out there, right? But you know what? You can have a lot of fun with that, right? Actually, if you put the right mindset around it, it's not, it's all part of the journey. And I think if you embrace the journey as much as the destination, then actually, it's going to be a good outcome. Don't be disappointed if things don't work out for you, right? The bottom line is they didn't work out because they weren't meant to work out, right? There was a reason for it. Understand the reasons, learn from them. If they're really important to you, correct things a little bit, but basically go into it with open arms and embrace it. Because if you don't, then it is a very competitive world out there, right? So unless you're prepared to put in all those hard yards around the networking, then you're probably going to fall by the wayside. But you need tenacity and you need the ability to enjoy what you're doing. And if you do those two things, then I think probably you'll get a pretty good outcome out of this.
Is there any other watches? So, I mean, pros and cons is probably the wrong way to say it. I mean, you've given some tips, some advice, your point of view, the type of portfolio worker you want to be. You know, you built it around your own lifestyle. I love that. Some of the watches, I think, as you said, it's competitive out there. What are the other watches for people to think about? And what was the one thing that you found that no one said to you that you just thought, right, you know, just the one thing that you thought, right, I wasn't expecting that, or, you know, when I get to give someone advice, I'm going to tell them that, watch out for this or get prepared for that.
I think some people fall naively into the interim world thinking that there will always be plenty of work and that it's an easy solution. It isn't, right? You need to be prepared for that barren period. And I've seen quite a few people panicking because they haven't understood their financial obligations and what it means to be without an income for a period of time. So I think, you know, it's a long game, this, Pat, and my advice is that whilst I was the accidental interim, I planned things pretty carefully in terms of what I've done with my money. You know, we're not extravagant. You know, we're making sure we're putting by for the times that aren't necessarily so easy. So even though I'm, you know, I've had a piece of work that has disappeared as a result of the COVID situation, like many of my colleagues. I'm fortunate enough I've got other work which is carrying on, and that's fantastic. But was I worried about this now? No. I was looking at this going, well, frankly, we'd be in a position where if this was 18 months to 2 years, it wouldn't be a problem for us. You know, so I think that really, really understanding that is an important part of it. And you know, maybe I've learned it, maybe I was told it, but it's a long game out there, right? So don't expect it all to come up roses immediately.
Adrian, you're a good man. Thanks for all of your support over the years. And yeah, I dare say we're going to continue growing our relationship and looking forward to seeing what happens there. May I wish you all the best, of course, and stay safe during these times. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be speaking again very soon.
Pat, it's been a pleasure. We've been talking about this for a little while. Thank you for the opportunity. Wish you and all the colleagues at S&S, you know, all the best. I'll look forward to a beer in the Jolly Orange when we can.
We will be having one of those very soon. Don't you worry about that.
Take care, my friend. Yeah. Cheers, Pat. Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah. All right. Cheers, buddy. Yeah.